members registered, 86. Number of lay voting members signed in attendance, 86. Total number voting, 122. Number of visitors registered, 19. Number of visitors signed in attendance, 19. Grand total registered, 143. Grand total attending, 141. Registration is closed. Next vote.
Thank you. Pastor Jess Felici. I do not see her in the room. It is quite possible that the Elections Committee is still counting.
Yeah, they are.
Minutes. Sorry, Norma.
I would like to refer the minutes from meeting number 3 and 4, to Synod Counsel.
General consent request from the Secretary to refer the drafts to Synod Counsel for review and action of the minutes. Are there any objections? Seeing no objections, it is approved. Again, not seeing Pastor Felici in the room and assuming the Elections Committee is still counting, we will return then to the debate that we were having on the original Muley resolution on a one-day multi-site video conference Synod Assembly. The pending question is on the motion to amend by changing the wording from every other year to make it, what? From thereafter to alternating years. Thereafter to alternating years instead of the every other year. Okay. So that is the motion on the floor. That's the pending question. And Pastor Ridenauer is the next in the queue for speaking. And I do not see Pastor Ridenauer. Oh, there you are.
I don't want to do anything until we're done with this amendment.
You, sir, were in the list as the next person speaking on the amendment.
Yes. That was to the original resolution.
Yes. I brought the amendment when I stood up to speak, Reverend Chair.
Okay, then I misunderstood because we had not voted on the amendment yet. I saw you at the microphone. I assumed you were in queue to debate on that. You were waiting for the full motion to come back?
Yeah.
Oh, my error then. So then the question is there anyone still desiring to speak on the amendment? Seeing none, you are ready for the question. Let me get the precise wording. The motion to amend to change the wording at the point beginning in 2022 and thereafter to change it to, oh, yes.
Sorry, it's my first one.
Just 1 second here. If I am correct, the original motion to change the wording was to every other year thereafter, and then there was a general consent motion to change it to alternating years, and that was accepted. So now the pending question is to amend the main motion with beginning in 2022 and thereafter, beginning in 22 and alternating years thereafter. That is the motion to amend. Okay? So that's the pending question. Is there any further debate on that? Seeing none, you're ready for the question. You have heard the question stated. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. The main motion is amended. We are now debating on the amended main motion. Next in line on the speakers list, just hold off here. According to my chart on this, we have had Pastor Muley speak. We have had Mr. Brill speak, we've had Pastor Olson speak. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Then according to my chart, the next speaker on the main motion would be Pastor Schaefer.
I did, I spoke to.
You did already.
Yes, I did.
Then, the next person I would have on my list would be Mr. Bruce Adams. Have you spoken yet?
No, not yet.
Mr. Adams. And before you begin, let me tell you the sequence. It is Mr. Adams, then Pastor Holbert, then Pastor Setley, then Mrs. Tomish, then Pastor Reidenauer, then Mrs. Daly, then Pastor Bartling, and then Pastor Ames. Okay, no, Joe Solberg gets introduced in there. Pastor Adams, go ahead. Mr. Adams, go ahead.
Don't put me up there yet. Bruce Adams, St. Paul, New Haven. I'm speaking with a bit of understanding towards the pastor who originally proposed this. I do understand the reasoning behind it, and I understand the purpose is to control the finances within the Synod because we're all struggling. But my concern is for the smaller churches. I am a member of one, and we are the largest church in our area. And I understand now that these smaller churches who have the opportunity to sometimes make their voice heard in these assemblies will not have that opportunity with video conferencing. I don't see that happening. I see a further disconnect between the Synod as a whole and these smaller parishes that are struggling right now. Yes, they are struggling to send people to Synod, but how much more would they struggle or even take an interest in a video conference? Most of the time you can't get people to take 5 minutes interest to do anything, let alone video conferencing. So my concern is for, I guess to say, I don't want to see us sacrifice our sense of unity on the altar of technology. I don't want to see that. I don't know how we can prevent it. Progress is inevitable, but there has to be some kind of way to include the smaller churches into this grand scheme. That's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Pastor Setley, you're actually next.
Tony Setley, Lutheran Campus Ministry at West Virginia University. I had said speak to with an amendment to the motion.
Then what you're doing is you make your amendment first, and then you can speak, and then it'll be on the amendment.
All right, so I move to amend the motion, that the motion be amended to include, along with any years having a multi-site video conference business day or days, that at least one in-person day of the assembly to include worship be added in each of those years.
I'm just going to have a point of information before we accept a second on this. Our current bylaws of the Synod require us to have at least one communion service when we hold a Synod assembly. So if your question is, if you want to make sure that whenever we have an in-person assembly, we have worship, that's already in the bylaws.
But with video conferencing?
That would be something where the Synod Council would have to figure out how we would do that. But if you're
the motion is to make sure that even with video conference years, that there would still be an in-person gathering day to conduct Synod business. So,
I don't know what that means.
well, I can.
okay, go ahead, make the motion.
Can I speak to it then?
Yeah, I need a second on it to introduce it on the floor. It has been seconded. Have you given a copy of it?
I have.
Okay, proceed.
It looks more or less like what I just said. Okay. So essentially what I'm saying is, well, let me start out from the selfish point of view. As someone representing an affiliated agency of the Synod, I get more communication done at Synod Assembly with the congregations of the Synod than I do throughout the rest of the year. I could not make up that time, and I'm sure the same can be said for Community Lutheran Partners, for other organizations that are coming to speak to the Assembly and give information to otherwise folks that we have trouble reaching. I would also say that I would truly miss the opportunity to worship alongside the greatest collection that we can have of folks, and would like to do that more than once every other year, because I think that is also vital. I do appreciate, and this was out of our conference where Pastor Bewley's idea sprung from, the fact that this will grow more expensive every year, almost by default. And it poses a challenge for differing people to come to a 2-day assembly that might be able to do business remotely. What I am proposing is simply that on those years when we would be doing video teleconference synods, assemblies, that only be a portion of the assembly. So maybe that accounts for 1 or 2 days of assembly business, but we would still come to meet at a central location without the overnight stay, without the additional cost we incur of 6 or 7 meals added into it, but that we'd still every year have that opportunity to get together, to talk in person, to commune in person, to see each other. That's all.
Okay, so I'm going to reread Pastor Setley's motion. Motion to amend to include, and be a new paragraph under the list of resolves. It's going to need some wordsmithing later. That multi-site video conference business days with at least 1 in-person day of assembly per year to include worship. Not the best phrasing, but it'll work. We get the point across. All right, anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment that Pastor Setley has proposed? Mr. Wangren.
Paul Wangren, Trinity, Martinsburg. Paul Wangren, Trinity, Martinsburg. I understand what you're doing, but I think I'm going to speak against it because I think that would be the same thing as meeting every year anyway, because we still have to all come together. And I am quite confident that the expenses are far greater than we think when you try to put video conferencing together. And I think that if you want to approve this amendment, better off would be to turn down the original amendment.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? Seeing no one coming to the microphone, you're ready for the question. The motion is to amend to include the multi-site video conference business days with at least 1 in-person day of assembly per year to include worship. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The main motion is not amended. The amendment fails. We're back to the main motion. At this point, next on my list is Pastor Holberg, speaking for.
Pastor Matt Holberg, Grace Lutheran Fairmont, speaking for, surprise, surprise, is the tech guy. Not because I like tech, which I really, really do, but because it gives us an opportunity to be smarter with what we have. Other organizations similar to ours, but not as cool, Rotary, Lions Club, in the last year, well, they're cool, they're just not as cool. In the last year have gone from banning and completely not allowing online groups, online voting, to encouraging it. And what do you know? Their rolls are up. Not only that, but the money that they spend in a monthly breakfast, which they're required to do and only miss 2 or 3 a year, now goes on to get more glasses for people, or goes on to whatever social outreach ministry they're doing. $4,000 to go to Madagascar? That's 3 churches here at this assembly, plus $200. I'm done.
Thank you, Pastor Holberg. Mrs. Tomish.
Reverend Chair, Vicki Tomich, Messiah, Moundsville. I'm speaking against the original resolution. Simply because, and this is why, I think people have to stop and think about the sense that some of us need a connection with the larger church face to face. Some with the synod and some with church-wide. And otherwise, we're in our little communities, blocking it off. Nobody else really knows what's going on with us, except for the reports that go to the synod. So, and I'm going to put Pastor
Lester.
Wester, I'm sorry. But he commented on the connectedness between congregations, synods, and church-wide. I think that's very important for us little people back here, if that makes any sense. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Tomish. Next speaker, Mr. Solberg. After Mr. Solberg will be Pastor Riedner. Pastor Riedner, if you want to start heading toward a mic, speed things up a little.
Sure.
Yes. Yes. I'll tell you if you have to sit back down.
Thank you, Reverend Chair. Joseph Solberg, Synod Treasurer and member of Church of the Covenant, Grafton. I move that we amend the main motion.
Oh, just 1 second. Mr. Riedner, Pastor Riedner, you can sit back down.
I move that we amend the main motion, striking the fourth whereas, which reads, whereas this church seeks to include more young adults in leadership and visioning of our synod and.
I need a second on that motion.
Second.
It has been seconded. You may speak to it, sir.
Thank you. So first of all,
Let me restate it. That we amend the main motion by striking the fourth operative, the fourth preamble, which states, whereas this church seeks to include more young adults in leadership and visioning of our synod. Okay, proceed.
Thank you. So first of all, let me apologize, because I know how much the Synod Assembly hates when folks move to amend things based on philosophy only and change things in the preamble that don't actually change the nature of the business. But it's important to me that we strike this line, which tokenizes our young adults, because it speaks to a greater problem that we have in the church in lifting up our young adults in leadership for no other reason than their youth, and not for their abilities, not for the content of their character, but on the youth alone. As a person who meets the definition as a certified ELCA young adult, and as a person who works in student leadership in West Virginia through West Virginia SAD, which is our state's preeminent peer-to-peer student leadership group, we do our youth a disservice when we tie their value to their youth. Because what that tells me is when I get old, I'm not going to have that value anymore. And so when I hear that, we look around and we're disappointed to see all these gray hairs, does that mean that my opinion will be less valuable then? The reason my opinion should be valuable to you now is not for my youth, but because I bring things to the table. I have abilities, and the other youth have abilities. And I hope that when you're lifting youth up in your congregations, it's not simply because they're youth, but because you see them for who they are, because they are a child of God, and because they bring certain assets to the table. Is George Friedline in the room? Oh, here he is. This man right here, he is 200 years old. Longevity, I will still be valuable to the church too.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. I will admonish the Assembly and myself, we are not to applaud, cheer, or anything else, no matter how funny it is sometimes. Okay, anyone else speaking to the Solberg amendment? Seeing no one coming to a microphone, the Solberg amendment before us is that we amend the fourth whereas, which reads, by striking the fourth whereas, which reads, whereas this church seeks to include more young adults in the leadership and visioning of our synod. The motion is on to strike. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The fourth preamble is struck. We are back to the main motion. And that means next up is Pastor Reitner.
How many are after me signed up?
We have, after you, sir, 3 more people.
Just do it, all right. You sure though this time?
Unless someone comes up and asks for more to be placed on the list.
No, I mean, I can actually get to the microphone.
Yes, you can get to the microphone.
Phil Reitner, First English Wheeling. The first one is there's an incongruity in the logic of the resolution where we're worried about saving money for our congregations, but then we're encouraging them to give the same amount of money to the Senate budget. Just a little flaw in the logic. Doesn't affect anything that's called for in action. Just wanted to point that out. I have an amendment, Reverend Chair. May I read it?
Yes, please. In the future, be sure to, if you're bringing an amendment, to begin with the amendment before engaging in debate, please.
What I had to say before didn't have anything to do with the amendment.
Well, technically, you shouldn't be up here. I could kick you back to the end of the line, but proceed. Proceed.
Would add a number 6 under the resolved clauses, which would read, the bishop and Senate Council shall appoint a team capable of demonstrating a video conference to a future Senate Assembly no later than 2020, at which point that Senate Assembly shall evaluate the appropriateness of continuing to implement this resolution.
Do I have a second on that? It has been seconded. The motion is to amend the resolution by adding operative number 6, that the bishop and Synod Council shall appoint a team capable of demonstrating a video conference to a future Synod Assembly no later than 2020, at which point the Synod Assembly shall evaluate the appropriateness of continuing to implement this resolution. Any debate? Pastor Reitner, you begin.
It speaks for itself.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? Seeing no one, Mr. Woodruff.
Steve Woodruff from St. Paul, Morgantown. Been waiting to see whether I should get into this conversation. This is a good amendment because this type of thing really needs to be evaluated. In my previous life, before I retired, I did participate in video conferencing with a number of groups. And when you try and do it, say, for an hour, it's tolerable. If you try going beyond that, it becomes somewhat intolerable. The technology, even though it's good, is really awkward. So this type of thing really needs to be evaluated. And I'm somewhat of a techie. Pastor Solberg is a techie, but my first computer class was on a UNIVAC about 50 years ago, literally. So we've got a long ways to go in order to make this interactive. And personally, when I come to Synod meetings like this, the interaction with all you people, some face-to-face time, is something that we need a lot more of in the Synod. And separating us out with the graphic interaction and everything like that is kind of a step in the wrong way. And think about when you've gone out to dinner and you see a young couple sitting there on a date, and each of them is staring into their iPhone and not talking to each other and even messaging across the table. So, we've got some work to do. This type of thing, when we get some good evaluation on it, is probably a better course of action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodruff. Anyone else wishing to rise to the amendment? I see no one else coming to the microphone to speak. The pending question is to amend the current resolution by adding operative paragraph number 6 that reads, the bishop and Synod Council shall appoint a team capable of demonstrating a video conference to this future Synod Assembly no later than 2020, at which point that Synod Assembly shall evaluate the appropriateness of continuing to implement this resolution. If you're ready for the question, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The motion carries. The main motion is now amended. Okay. We're back to the main motion at this point. Next person up is Colleen Daly, Mrs. Daly. Ms. Daly? Colleen? I think we've lost Ms. Daly. Okay, next up, Sally Bartling. Pastor Bartling. Pastor Bartling has left. Next up, Pastor Carl Ames.
Pastor Carl Ames, Christ the King Lutheran, Huntington. I speak against the original resolution. We are the church connected. We are the church that gathers. And I don't think we gather electronically. We gather, I want to echo what Chaplain Setley said, we gather and network together in person. And also we gather to worship. I'd love to see us worship more than once a year. And we're not going to be doing that, I don't think, if we take this resolution every other year. We're a very scattered community across West Virginia. We don't see each other very often. I would like to see us together as we can afford it more often, not less, to be the church, and to hear how the chaplaincy is going, to hear how Community Lutheran Partners is going, and then engage in discussion with those people. That's all, sir.
Thank you, Pastor Ames. Next up, Mr. Tim Bain.
Tim Bain, Vice Lutheran in Fairmont. And I'm against this. It's my second time being at Senate Assembly. And one of the things I've been able to do here and bring back to the church is speaking with the vendors and stuff. And I don't see us having that opportunity going to a video conference.
Thank you, Mr. Bain. That exhausts our Pastor Cantu. You did not send a piece of paper up asking to be on the speaker's list.
I'm Larry Cantu. I'm retired, finally. Well, mostly. Anyway, I want to say that there might be something in the technology that we need to explore. It might be good for our deans and bishop to meet once a month by Skyping or whatever that thing is. And, or the pastors within a particular conference meeting together on a weekly basis to kind of talk about what's happening in their community. That would increase our involvement with each other. So I think that we want to take the opportunity to explore the opportunities with use of this technology. And I appreciate very much the action that has been taken so far on the resolution.
Thank you, Pastor Cantu. 1 second, please. Until such time as Pastor Setley.
Point of inquiry, I have a question.
Sure.
The current Synod bylaws, do they dictate once annual communion at assembly or in general?
Every time we gather in assembly, we're to have communion. That's what it stipulates. That's part of the program.
Another question then would be, can we pass this resolution if it goes against the current bylaws by its very nature, because we cannot video conference and have communion?
I'm glad someone thinks that we can't video conference and have communion. This is actually an open debate in some corners of the church, thankfully not
this
here.
one.
Not this one, and let's not start that one here. Okay, first off, some things that you know about constitutional requirements and bylaw requirements. The model constitution for synods has a required provision. Synod assemblies must meet at least triennially. Okay, so we are only required by constitution to meet once every 3 years. All right, number one. Number two, the question Pastor Setley asked specifically about worship is covered in the bylaws under the section that deals with Synod Assembly program. If you have online access to the Synod Assembly Bulletin reports and you go to the appendices at the back, there's a section called Governing Documents, and those bylaws are posted there and you can review that. Now, can we adopt this even with that bylaw in place? Any motion is out of order. Anything adopted is null and void if it conflicts with your constitution and bylaws. However, my judgment is, and you may dissent from the ruling of the chair on this point if you wish, my judgment is that since this is not implementable until 2022, that would allow sufficient time for the Synod Council or any appointed committees to investigate any possible problems that exist with our current governing documents and seek to propose amendments to those to make this possible. Okay? This is not an unusual thing. For instance, you know, in the larger church, we'll say we want to go in this direction, but we know there's a bunch of stuff that stands in the way. So since we set a date to fix it somewhere out, we take time to make those necessary changes before we get there. Of course, if the body doesn't approve the change, then that resolution would become null and void at that point. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. We're still working here at the desk to make sure that we have this resolution, the main motion, in final form with all the amendments. We are not prepared to state the question formally at this point until we have that put together. So I'm going to suspend debate upon this until that is done. So we will return to it, and we are going to go to the report of the Elections Committee. Pastor Felici, Jess. Hold it. I first need registration committee.
Oh, yes.
Registration committee. I need to know, and you can stand there, has there been any change to the registration number since the last time you reported? Since there is no change to the registration number since last reported, we'll consider the registration report valid. Proceed, Pastor Felici.
For the election to consultation committee clergy, there's one position available, 109 votes, 109 votes were cast, of which 109 were legal, with 55 being required for a majority to elect. Legal votes were as follows: 64 for Linda Muley, 44 for Randolph Richardson.
Linda Muley, receiving the necessary number to be elected by majority for consultation clergy position, is declared elected.
For the election to discipline committee laity, there are 2 positions available. 102 votes were cast, of which 102 were legal, 52 being necessary for election. Legal votes were as follows: 54, Nancy Weeks; 45, Brandon Mitchell; 43, Kim Holbert; 43, Alice Irvin.
Could you repeat those last 2 numbers for me?
43, Kim Holbert; 43, Alice Irvin.
Nancy Weeks, receiving the required number to be elected to the position, is declared elected to the discipline committee layperson. We have a runoff for the final position between Brandon Mitchell, Kim Holbert, and Alice Irvin. So there will be another ballot. Do you have your ballot prepared?
I do, sir.
The ballot is prepared. I need the ushers and the tellers team up front for distribution.
Would you like me to hold the rest of the report?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Proceed with the rest of the report. Sorry, I apologize.
Do you still have those stickers? I'm just kidding.
You are getting a sticker. There you go.
First and last time. Okay. For the election to Synod Council clergy, 1 position is available. The number of legal votes cast was 105. That means 53 were necessary for an election. Legal votes cast are as follows: 73, Ruth Bullwinkle; 32, Jacqueline Campbell.
Ruth Bullwinkle, receiving the necessary amount to be elected by majority, is hereby declared elected Synod Council clergy, Mon Valley Mountain Conference.
For the election to Synod Council Laity, Ohio Kanawha Valley Conference. 1 position available. 100 votes were cast, of which 100 were legal, 51 being necessary for an election. Legal votes were as follows: 69 for Andrea Brock, 21 for David Stewart.
Andrea Brock, receiving the necessary majority, is hereby declared elected as Synod Council Layperson, Ohio Kanawha Valley Conference.
For the election to Synod Council Laity at Large, there was 1 position available. 95 votes were cast, of which 95 were legal, 48 being necessary for an election. Legal votes cast were as follows: 52 for Mary Sanders, 43 for Matthew Sampson.
Mary Sanders, receiving the required number to be elected by majority, is hereby declared elected Synod Council Lay Member at Large.
For the election to Synod Council Youth at Large, 1 position available. There were 105 votes cast, of which 105 were legal, 53 being necessary for an election. Legal votes cast were as follows: 67 for Laurel Muley Alexander, 38 for Allison Resser.
Laurel Muley Alexander, receiving the necessary majority, is hereby declared elected as Synod Council Youth Member at Large.
For the election to Churchwide Assembly Laity Female, 1 position available. There were 100 votes cast, of which 100 were legal, 51 being necessary for an election. Legal votes were as follows: 58 for Pamela Pritt, 42 for Beth Johnson.
Pamela Pritt, receiving the necessary number to be elected by majority, is declared elected Churchwide Assembly Lay Female Voting Member.
For the election to Churchwide Assembly Youth or Young Adult, 1 position available. 104 votes were cast, of which 104 were legal, 53 being necessary for an election. Legal votes cast were as follows: 55 for Devin Ames, 49 for Caitlin Ruddle.
Devin Ames, receiving the necessary number to be elected by majority, is declared elected Churchwide Assembly Youth Young Adult Voting Member.
For the election to Churchwide Assembly Person of Color or whose primary language is other than English, 1 position available. 95 votes were cast, of which 95 were legal, 48 being necessary for an election. 56 for Olga Bondiski, 39 for Supa Arthur.
Olga Bondiski, receiving the necessary number to be elected by majority, is hereby declared elected Churchwide Assembly Person of Color or primary language other than English. Does that include all of them?
That completes my report.
And now I can What are you doing?
Turn around and look at you. Bondiskey. Reverend Chair, would it be inappropriate for me to call him a smartass?
I believe that as soon as your report and balloting is done, you can bring that as a motion. Unfortunately, I would consider it germane. So.
If you are ready, I am ready for a third ballot.
And again, I'm going to ask Registration Committee yet again, are we still at the same registration numbers? We are. Okay, those handing out the ballots, come forward, please. Ushers, seal the doors of the assembly.
From first and second ballot. The good news is it's getting smaller. The bad news is it might be harder for you to see. So take your time. I'm going to read for you the names. On the third ballot are Ms. Kim Holbert, Ms. Alice Irvin, and Dr. Brandon Mitchell. You may vote for one. Vote for one. When you are finished, turn it over, and then when we give you instructions, you will pass it to the end of your row for collection.
Thank you to everyone who has moved in front of the blue line.
When you are finished, turn your ballot over, face down, and pass it to the end of your row for collection, please.
Hey, you let someone get out.
I'm scared.
Does anyone still have a ballot in their possession? Balloting is therefore declared, oh, wait a second, is that a one? Balloting is thereby declared closed. Elections Committee, go off and do your counting, please. Madam Secretary, are you ready with that resolution? Okay. Do you want to read it there? We are back to the motion, that we were debating, the Muley motion. We're going to ask the Secretary to state the question because we have exhausted the speakers list. No one has come to me to be added to the speakers list, so we are back at the main motion. Okay, state the question.
Whereas the costs associated with gathering as an entire synod continue to rise, amounting to over $800 for a congregation to send a pastor and 2 voting members, and whereas we seek to be good stewards of our resources of money, time, and energy, and whereas many of our small membership congregations are struggling financially, and this annual cost can become a financial burden, limiting other ministries through the congregation, and whereas we recognize that a 2-day event necessitates loss of work and in many cases loss of income, which makes this very difficult for many people. And whereas at the time of the creation of the ELCA and the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod 30 years ago, the technology was not available which exists now, making physically gathering together a necessity in order to conduct business, and whereas our respective ministries, highlights, and photos are easily shared through the internet and social media, along with frequent communication among people across our Synod, therefore be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly directs the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod Council to investigate and establish the groundwork for a one-day multi-site video conference for Synod Assembly beginning in 2022 and alternating years thereafter, with each conference having one or two sites where pastors, voting members, and visitors would gather, and be it further resolved that the Synod Council together with the bishop would set the agenda for the assembly so as to limit the business aspects of Synod Assembly, which are constitutionally required to not more than 3 hours, in order to leave a significant amount of time for conferences to work together on local endeavors for the proclamation of the gospel. And be it further resolved that congregations be encouraged to give the money saved from not physically sending 3 voting members to the assembly to the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod to further support the Synod budget. And be it further resolved that the bishop, in consultation with the Office of the Secretary of the ELCA and West Virginia Western Maryland Synod Council, prepare the necessary changes to our Synod Constitution and bylaws as necessary to effectuate the implementation of this resolution. And be it further resolved that it is recognized that this change is not a reflection of a desire to become unconnected, but instead is a desire rather to become connected in a new, different, and creative ways to engage more people in the life and mission of the Synod. And be it further resolved that the Bishop and Synod Council shall appoint a team capable of demonstrating a video conference to a future Synod Assembly no later than 2020, at which point that Synod Assembly shall evaluate the appropriateness of continuing to implement this resolution.
The motion is stated. You are ready for the question. All in favor of adoption of the resolution as it has been amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
It is one of those cases. Is someone going to call for a division of the assembly? Yes. All in favor, please rise. All opposed, rise. The nays have it. The motion is, the resolution is defeated. The chair wants to thank the assembly for healthy and civil debate. That is when we were at our best. Next, I'd like to call to the next up is referencing counsel. So Pastor Tim Spence, oh, that's what we did. Does referencing counsel have anything? Yes, they do have something else. Referencing counsel has received the resolution or motion that was brought by Pastor Kliner following the seminary report. Do you have a report, Mr. Ridenhour?
I have a report that includes 2 amendments to Jerry's resolution.
Proceed, Pastor Ridenhour.
Bill Ridenhour, First English and Wheeling. Marjorie Wolf is letting me do the report for reference and counsel here at the microphone, since she's the chairwoman. Tell me what I need to do, Matt. Do I just say we got the resolution from Jerry and we're about to amend it?
You're recommending amendments to it, yes.
Okay. Does the assembly have?
The assembly has received the original resolution. It was passed out by the ushers just before dinner ended. lunch ended.
All right. Then the first amendment being proposed by reference in council is in the second whereas clause to insert the phrase through specific questions that went wanting in the second line of the second whereas after the word concerns.
This is the resolution from Pastor Kliner revolving United Lutheran Seminary. Okay. Could you restate that, please?
May I read it again?
Yes.
In the second whereas, if you go to the second line where it begins expressed its doubts and concerns, it would be inserted there, comma, through specific questions that went wanting, comma.
Pastor Reiner, I'd be interested in having us deal with each of these amendments in sequence and dealing with this one first and then moving to the second.
You're the chair, man, not me.
We're looking at the second preamble. This is a resolution of concern regarding United Lutheran Seminary. Resolution of concern regarding United Lutheran Seminary. It was referred to reference in council. Reference in council is coming back. As a committee of the assembly, it does not require a second. They are therefore moving amendment of the second preamble by insertion of the words through specific questions that went unanswered after the word concerns and before the word for in the second line, so that the second preamble would then read, and whereas the 2016 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod expressed its doubts and concerns through specific questions that went unanswered for the plans of the seminary regarding the then pending plans for merger and consolidation of the seminary at Gettysburg and the seminary at Philadelphia.
Point of order, that is not the language that Pastor Wright now is suggesting. He said when wanting.
Did you write it down?
Okay. Or did I read it? I read it.
Okay. So let me try that again. I'm going to pick it up. Expressed doubts, the second line. Expressed its doubts and concerns through specific questions that went wanting.
Take away my alliteration.
That went wanting for the plans of the seminary regarding the then pending. Sorry, thank you for catching that, Pastor Kliner. Okay, so the motion is to amend, does not require a second. Is there, Pastor Ridenhour, you as a committee representative is free to speak to it?
In 2016, the Senate Assembly adopted a resolution that was a list of very specific questions to Gettysburg Seminary regarding the proposed merger. In response, we got a 340-page data dump with no attempt to answer the questions we asked.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone else wishing to speak for or to? The amendment. The question is on the amendment.
Yeah.
Mr. Wagner.
Yeah, and I speak against it. I don't know how many of you were here to see how large those questions were and how specific. And I was prepared to speak for the motion before. I think I'd be prepared as, I am the representative for our synod to the board, to the seminary. I'm also the treasurer on the board for the seminary, which means that I've been engaged in quite a bit of what's going on this year. I would like to be able to speak in favor of the motion originally, but I'm not going to do that now because I think that this destroys what really might be able to happen by putting this into it. So I vote against it.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Pastor Ridenhour, you're entitled to speak a second time. I see no one else coming to the microphone. So, the motion before us is to amend the second preamble by the insertion after concerns but before for in the second line, the insertion being through specific questions that went wanting. You're ready for it. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no.
No.
The amendment from reference in council is not accepted. Your second amendment, sir.
The second amendment concerns the second resolve clause. And it would insert a phrase in the third line of that resolved clause where it begins, our concerns. Are you with me there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And by inserting the phrase, after our concerns would be a comma, where it would read, our concerns, comma, specifically concerning but not limited to the vital ministry of the Town and Country Institute as it relates to our rural Appalachian context.
I'm just going to verify something. Is the proper name, Dr. Volcanic, are you in the room? Is it Town and Country Institute or Town and Country Church Institute?
Church.
Okay, so if there's no objection to make that amendation, thank you. Okay, so the recommendation is to insert in the second operative the phrase specifically concerning but not limited to the vital ministry of the Town and Country Church Institute as it relates to our rural Appalachian context. Again, does not require a second. It is on the floor. Pastor Reinhardt speaking on behalf of the committee.
The committee was of the opinion that given our context, it would be important to reiterate and reemphasize with a new school the importance of what Gettysburg Seminary has meant to our local area, and in the hopes that that would not be lost in the future of a new school going in new directions and new ways.
Thank you. Anyone speaking to the amendment? 2 for, against?
Paul Weingren, Trinity Martinsburg. I would approve that because I think that is very important for us in our synod. We are virtually rural all the way through. And having Gil Walkening as our DEM and also as the chair for the TCCI Institute, and for his work he's explained yesterday, that is very appropriate.
Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? Pastor Wyrick, are you coming to the microphone?
I am. Patrice Wyrick, pastor at St. Paul's, New Haven. I just have a question. Is that the only concerns that are to go to the seminary board? Or are there other concerns that aren't here listed that would be going to the seminary board, or is that the only thing that we are proposing as a concern to them?
This would be my interpretation, and let me test this with the assembly, that the original operatives had concerns, which leaves it somewhat vague, which suggests there might be several concerns, and those concerns would then be generated and specified by Synod Counsel and me. By adding the specifically does not change that. It just makes sure that one particular thing is covered amongst a possible constellation of others. Nothing would prevent you, however, Pastor Wyrick, from offering an amendment of the second degree to, okay.
I just wanted I wanted clarification.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the amendment? I see no one else coming to the microphone. The amendment is before.
I think referencing counsel still has a privilege to communicate to the assembly that we are bringing the resolution to the floor with a recommendation for adoption.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Pastor Reinhardt. So the pending question at this point, however, is on to amend by inserting the phrase specific in the second resolve, specifically concerning but not limited to the vital ministry of the Town and Country Church Institute as it relates to our rural Appalachian context.
I'm sorry, point of information. Where does that go exactly?
The second.
So I know it goes in the second.
In the third line of the second resolve after the word concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. That is the question. Has been stated. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ayes have it. We're in the main motion. The Pastor Reidner has indicated that referencing counsel endorses the resolution for adoption.
And I jumped the gun. My apologies.
That's quite all right, sir. We are now back to the main motion. It is Pastor Kliner's motion. He is entitled First Speech.
Reverend Chair, the goal of this resolution is not to antagonize nor pick a fight, but rather to indicate our concerns to the seminary that we have a historic and very beneficial relationship, historically beneficial relationship with. So often, we hear the report of the seminary and we go out into lunch or out into the narthexes and we talk, and over the years I've heard growing concern for the state of Gettysburg Seminary, United Lutheran Seminary now out of a deep and abiding love for the institution and the school. One of my parishioners is a descendant of the Schmucker family, and she constantly comes to me and says, in a very charitable sense, what's happening at my seminary? And so, I want us to be able to say to the seminary, we're concerned about this in an intentional way. But the other part of this is, I also want us to be intentional enough that we can ask the seminary for specific response. Meaning that oftentimes we hear the report, we go out and we share our own concerns, and the overwhelming feeling I get from people is, what can we do about it? Well, we have a representative on the seminary board. We are the seminary's constituency. And so I would like us to think about this more than just even, well, Gettysburg came and we heard their report and then they left. And that's fine. I'm not criticizing them for leaving. I would like us to have a specific agenda item next Synod Assembly to look at the concerns pertaining to the Synod, specifically about Gettysburg. Again, I hope to do this. My intent in this resolution was not to pick a fight, but to hopefully help improve the seminary, but also our relationship with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Kliner. Mr. Wangren, before you begin speaking, how many others wish to speak to this resolution? Okay, I'm not seeing a huge lot of groups, so we're not going to do a speakers list. Go ahead, Pastor Wangren.
Paul Wangren, Trinity Martinsburg, and I am the representative. The only thing I would say is it's United Lutheran Seminary, it's not Gettysburg anymore.
No, I know.
I know, and that's one of the things that we all have to work at. I am in full agreement with this resolution. I'm in full agreement because I think it is very important that there become a greater communication back and forth. And I really mean back and forth. It's not just what I am bringing from the seminary to you, but it is your opportunity to raise the questions. And the thought has gone to my mind, it might make sense for me to go to the different conferences and have an opportunity to meet and just talk about what's going on in the seminary. It's been a challenging year, there's no question. But I must say that there is a tremendous amount of positive things that are taking place, and we're moving forward, I think, very well. So I would look for that opportunity to share more about that throughout the year, but also in assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Wangren. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you. My name is Bruce Dalton. I'm a lay member of St. John's Lutheran in Davis, and I'm also a lay member of the Synod Council. With regard to this resolution, I'm opposed to the entire tone of it, not necessarily the content. The only pieces of it that don't sound threatening to me are the first paragraph and the final paragraph. It concerns me deeply as a lay person to hear the tone of something of this nature coming from a religious body. Rather than saying, it seems like we're saying, hey, we had some problems with this before it existed. We're now telling you, we told you so, and we still don't like what's happening, as opposed to saying, you know, hey, you had a rough first year, or congratulations on the end of your first year. You had a rough first year. We pray for continued, or we pray for success for you. But we still have some thick questions that we'd like answered.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Anyone else wishing to come to a microphone? I am seeing no one else coming to a microphone. You are ready for the question? I want to ask the secretary to read the resolution as amended, and it'll be stating of the question.
Whereas the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod has a historic relationship with the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg, sending our students to study and be formed as pastors and professionals in our churches, and investing time, treasures, and innumerable prayer for the well-being of the seminary. And whereas the 2016 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod expressed its doubts and concerns for the plans of the seminary regarding the then pending plans for merger and consolidation of the seminary at Gettysburg and the seminary at Philadelphia. And whereas the seminary's Board of Governors proceeded in their plans to merge and consolidate the seminaries at Philadelphia and Gettysburg and create the United Lutheran Seminary, which would be the successor body for the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg and the primary seminary in relation to the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod. And whereas the community of the United Lutheran Seminary has experienced great upheaval, strife, and uncertainty in its leadership, governance, and administration, therefore be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod formally expresses its grave concern for the well-being of the United Lutheran Seminary. And therefore be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod calls upon our representative on the Seminary Board of Directors to convey our concerns, specifically concerning, but not limited to, the vital ministry of the Town and Country Church I can't read his writing, I'm sorry. Institute, as it relates to our rural Appalachian context, to the Seminary Board of Directors, and regularly report back to the Synod Council over the next year as to how the seminary is proceeding to respond to our concerns. And therefore be it resolved that the 2019 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod make a place on the agenda for a more in-depth reporting of the welfare of the seminary, apart from the normal report and representation that the seminary usually provides, and deliberation upon the future relationship between the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod and the United Lutheran Seminary. And be it finally resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod call upon the clergy and laity of the Synod to pray zealously and diligently for the community of the United Lutheran Seminary and its well-being.
The question is stated. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no.
No.
In favor, please rise. Opposed, you may sit. Opposed, please rise. Ushers, I need a count. All set. Usher team. Mike, bring them forward.
Yeah. All right, all in favor?
Wait, no, what? I do that. Okay. So what I need you to do, Mike, is tell your ushers how you want them to divide the room so you're not counting people twice and all that good stuff. Ready? All in favor, rise and remain standing. You need to be front of the bar. If you're ask the ushers, are you including yourselves in the count or not?
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Okay, clarification, just a minute. It seems like you got. Please count these two rows here. You count these 3 rows. All the way across. Yeah.
Everybody said. Everybody said. Guys, everybody said. I'm here. All the others up front. Anyone beyond the blue line, right?
Right.
You count that part, join in the front?
Yeah.
Do you have a number, Mike? You may be seated. All opposed, rise.
Okay, I have the tally.
Yes, sir.
We have 54 4 and 24 against.
The ayes have it, the motion carries. Next on the agenda, report from Mr. Solberg, the Synod Treasurer. No, I need you to sit. We have a report from Nominations Committee, from Elections Committee. And Solberg, don't go far that far.
I might have left something.
Okay. We have a report just in from Elections Committee. I'd like to have that report at this time.
Reverend Chair, are you ready?
Barbara.
I don't think you are. For the election to Discipline Committee laity, there's one position available. 100 votes were cast, of which 100 were legal, 51 being necessary for an election. Legal votes cast were as follows: 41, Brandon Mitchell; 37, Kim Holbert; 22, Alice Irvin.
No one receiving the necessary majority to be elected. There is no election. Runoff shall be between Brandon Mitchell and Kim Holbert. Do you have a ballot ready? Let me ask, registration committee, has there been any change to the registration? Seeing no change to registration, those in charge of distributing ballots come forward. Ushers, seal the doors of this hall.
Instructions for the fourth ballot. Don't screw it up. There are 2 names on the ballot. Vote for one. Vote for one. When you are finished, turn your ballot over until you receive instructions to pass it to the Elections Committee for collection. You must be on this side of the blue line in order to vote.
There's an old ballot here.
The old ballots would have had 3 names on them.
Yeah, okay.
Make sure you hand in your ballot.
ballot standing out? Seeing none. Elections Committee are dismissed. Now, Mr. Solberg. Sitting in the back of the assembly may not be the most convenient thing in the world.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Solberg. I'm the Synod Treasurer. I'm also a member of Church of the Covenant in Grafton. Before I jump into the budget stuff, I want to review last night's offering from Mass. With the addition of 2 checks we received this morning, we received $1,699.02, which means that we will be sending to the Federal Chaplains Fund for Leaders Scholarship $1,359.22. And to Marissa Bechtel for her Yagam mission, we will be sending $339.80. So let's take a minute to celebrate that. All right, so jumping right into the budget, there was a letter in the appendix that you might have read. Those of you who have read it and have talked to me about that, thank you for reading that. What I've got projected on the screen is actually just it's the exact same thing you have in your bulletin reports. So if you want to follow along on page 63, you may. But I choose to project it every year just in case you don't have ready access to that, or if it's easier for you to see. So we'll just go section through section. I'm just going to hit highlights. If you have questions, please raise them until after I'm done, and I'll be glad to answer any of those for you. In the first section, which is grants to agencies and institutions, well, first, what you're looking at, pay attention to the top. The first line is what we actually expended in 2017, so we're looking at expenditures. The 2018 line, that's what you approved last year at Synod Assembly that we're in the process of executing right now. And then the 2019 line, that's the proposal for this year. That's the proposal we have now for next year. So when I talk about change, I'm actually talking about change from the budget that you presented last year, the middle column, to the budget that we have this year up for vote, which is the last column, the end column. So when I talk about change, I'm talking about change from the budget we're currently executing to the budget that we're proposing for execution next year. And in this section, we propose no change, so it's easy enough. In the next section, we do propose a section net change of $12. The only thing that you see change in this section is the rostered leader debt reduction. That's actually set up to be 1% of the total budget. So the reason that that has decreased by $12 is because the total budget has decreased, and that changes with the total budget. Everything else in this section stays the same. The next section is polity expenses. We do see first a change in the Region 8 line item. The format that we now have our Region 8 coordinator has changed. And so that's our buy-in price in 2019 to have the Region 8 coordinator, which is something very important to what the bishop does and what we do with the seminaries and arranging things. So you see an increase there, and that's because that's our buy-in cost. You see a decrease in the West Virginia Council of Churches. This is one of the places Finance Committee chose to make a cut. West Virginia Council of Churches, that is sort of an optional thing that we contribute to, and they do a lot of really wonderful work, if you don't know, especially around pulling in the faith-based community into the substance abuse problem. But unfortunately, cuts do need to be made. So we see a net change in that section of $1,458. Moving on to the first part of Synod operations and staff, you do see a lot of changes here. The first one is because if you don't know, we did move the Synod office to a smaller, cheaper location, and so you see a massive reduction there. Well, it feels massive, but unfortunately it's not massive enough. You do see a large reduction in our rent. And then you also see some other smaller reductions there, mostly just to right-size things something that's important to note is the far left column is the only column that represents actual spent dollars. The other two are theory columns. And a lot of times we spend less than what we theorize. In fact, we've come in under budget every year for the last several years. And so sometimes what you see happening is, we have budgeted $6,300 for telephone and internet, and the reality is it only cost us $58.72 last year, so we bring that number down a little bit to better reflect the reality. And that's what you see going on in this section. The next section has to do with the staff that we pay for. Our Synod effectively has a staff of 3, the bishop, the office administrator, and Reverend Dr. Gilmore Koenig, our DEM, but the ELCA churchwide takes care of our DEM for us. So in our budget, we only have the bishop and the office administrator. The bishop has a change in salary, which is based on having another year of ministry. The same way that your pastors get a little bit every time that they become more tenured. The bishop will be more tenured in 2019 than he is in 2018, so that changes that. And then also it's ran through the cost of living adjustment. That same thing that if you receive Social Security, you're used to hearing about that at the beginning of the year. That's so that that salary has the same buying power it had the last year. So effectively there is no raise. It's just keeping that buying power the same as prices go up. And you see the same with the office administrator. There's a slight change, but that has to do with the cost of living adjustment. So you see a net change in this section of an increase of $695. Finally, the last section of our budget is sort of the section where everything else falls. The most massive change you see here is with the bishop's travel line. In the bishop's first year, he didn't expend nearly as much as we expected him to in travel. So we thought, ooh, this is great, and we scaled that back in our 2018 budget. But then as he became acquainted with the position and sort of settled into it, reality hit, and what we had originally projected was true. And so we needed to bring that back up to reality. So that section has a net change of an increase in $3,100, but on this page we also see the total line item, which is the same you see on page 64. And our total budget proposes a decrease of $1,275. Paul, do you want to stop me for a second?
I do.
Okay.
You might want to explain the professional services as what was actual and what we had budgeted.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That's a really good point. So in professional services, you see in the actual line item, we only spent $674 in 2017. So you might be left to wonder, why are we budgeting $7,000 next year? And the reason is our professional services basically is just what we call the audit expense. It might wrap a few other things in there, but it refers to the auditor. The auditor had some health problems a little while back. If you remember, that happened in the previous Synod Assembly. And so we're actually behind on an audit. And so this past calendar year, an audit has been completed, but we were not billed for it in the calendar year. So it will be billed in the middle calendar year. And so what's going to happen is that one's probably going to be over budget, because we're going to probably be hit with 2 audits in the 2018 calendar year. But I mean, ultimately, we're not paying more. It just sort of hit it all the wrong time, or it's going to hit it all the wrong time. Thank you for stopping me there, Paul. We'll move on now to the income proposal. So this is back on page 62, so you're flipping back now. I prefer to look at the expenses first. Starting last year, we started presenting the income in a different way than we had in the past. In the past, we came up with what expenses we expected to have, and then we said, this is the mission support we need to hit that. The problem that we were having is that we were continuing to see a downward trend of mission support, and the gap in between what we were asking for and what we were receiving was growing so large that we weren't sure that we were accurately portraying what was going on. In 2015, we received about $470,000 in mission support, total congregational mission support, and then in 2016, that dropped to $430,000, so a drop of almost 10%. And then in 2017, you see here, we received $410,000. So what we do now is we project our numbers assuming that mission support will stay the same. So we're hoping the downward trend stops, but what we project as if it's going to stay the same. And so what you see in the 2019 budget is that we projected to receive the same thing that we actually received in 2017, $410,821. If you look down at the unrestricted savings line, in order to make that budget balanced, we would need to pull $36,000 from unrestricted savings. Something else you should be aware of is that in 2017, effectively we bled $13,000. That didn't actually come out of unrestricted savings. That actually just depleted a cushion that we had in the general checking account. But still, we really did bleed $13,000 last year. For the budget for this year, Synod Assembly last year approved a budget that projected us bleeding $23,000, and that was approved. And now in 2019, we're projected, if mission support stops trending downward, if it just levels out, and we fully expended the budget, we would bleed $36,000. Now the good news is there, we never fully expend the budget. This past year, I think we came something like $25,000 under budget, and still bled $13,000. So that's the reality of the situation we're in. I'm going to leave that there for a minute and give you a little bit of a narrative. But before I begin, I have to describe that I see my role at this podium as sort of being twofold. In my mind, I compartmentalize things, and things belong in particular boxes. And sometimes something belongs in two different boxes, and the boxes are pretty far apart. And that's how I feel right now. I have a role to speak to you as the treasurer of an organization, as someone responsible to tell you about the financial future and let you know what your options are. But I also have a role to speak to you as a Christian brother. As the treasurer, my message has to be direct and honest. And that message is, be afraid. The system is dire. You know, the situation is not good, and we have to act. But my message as a Christian brother has to be not afraid. It would be easy enough for me to stand up here and say that you have to do something. It's for Jesus' sake. We're his church, and we have to do this for the gospel. But that would be a lie. If we're going to talk about saving the Synod, we have to do so honestly. And what we want to save is this special grouping that we have, where we share our joys and our frustrations, and especially those unique frustrations related to Appalachian ministry that not everyone else understands. What we want to share is this special dialogue that we have, being West Virginia, Western Maryland Synod, and this bond that we have over things like Camp Luther and CLIP and campus ministry at WVU. And we want to share like this special bond that we get by picking over and picking on Sean Smith. And you know, that curiosity when you see the smirk on Ridenour's face, because he always looks like he's in on an inside joke that nobody knows anything else about. And hearing Pastor Christine Olson's laugh from across the room or sometimes across the building. And these things are all special, and they're worth saving, and they're worth fighting for, but they aren't the gospel, and thank God for that. To harken back to what the bishop said in his sermon last night, nothing we can do can add or take away from the work of Christ. And so as we approach this question as the future of the Synod, we should approach it with the humility to realize that God does not need the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod to do his work. He doesn't need me, he doesn't need this Synod, he doesn't need the ELCA, he doesn't need the Lutheran World Federation, he didn't even need Martin Luther. He might have needed Philip Melanchthon, but he didn't need Martin Luther. And with that humility, we should find some comfort. Because what that means is that we can royally screw this up, and any voting assembly with Sean Smith as a voting member is probably going to royally screw some things up. We can screw this up, and it's okay. Because the Church of Christ is always has been and always will be the church triumphant. And that should give us some comfort. The 5th article of the Augsburg Confession reminds us that the Holy Spirit works his faith when and where he pleases. And if he pleases to work his faith somewhere in between the Elk and the Tiger River, and here in Appalachia, he will do so. And whether or not we are here in this same expression will not slow him down. He is an almighty God, and he will work everywhere and anywhere and wherever he pleases, as the confessions remind us. So with that comfort, we can start the discussion. As I see it, there's 3 options. We can decrease spending. And the reason the Finance Committee didn't propose deeper cuts is because at this point, when you're talking about a $30,000 gap, we would have to cut things so deep that it would signal a change in what the Synod believes in and what we uplift as important to us. So at past Synod assemblies, certain things have been uplifted as important. We've uplifted seminarian aid and Lutheran campus ministry and CLIP and having a physical office location and having a full-time office administrator and having a full-time bishop. And we've uplifted all these things as important to us, and it would not be right for a change of that magnitude to come from the Finance Committee. That would have to come from you. Another option is increase revenue, and there's 2 ways that might happen. One is that churches send more mission support, but I can tell you from being at a few Synod assemblies is that usually when there's a resolution to increase mission support from churches, we still see a decrease in mission support the next year. It doesn't seem to work. The other option is to decrease proportional share. It's not necessarily a good option, but if you're sitting there going, so wait a minute, if we receive $410,000 and our budget's only 300 something, how come we're not making the budget? It's because we have offering that we give to the ELCA. And we send them 33% of what you send us, and that's this proportional share you see there. And, what the ELCA requests of its Synod is 55%, which feels a little top-heavy to start with, but we're kind of abysmally low to begin with. We're not the lowest Synod, but we're real close. So one way to increase revenue is to keep more of the revenue that comes in. And then finally, there's a third option, and it's a perfectly valid option. And in the third option is actually wrapped a 4th option. And the third option is to do nothing. It would be perfectly valid to say, I'm not sure that the existence of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod really plays a large factor in the word and sacrament ministry that my congregation does in my community. And I think if my congregation were a member of a neighboring Synod instead, I think we would do just as effective word and sacrament ministry. And if that's how you feel, that there may not be anything worth saving here, then that's entirely valid. Because word and sacrament ministry on the ground in your communities is what needs to be protected. The Synod only exists to serve the congregations, so we have to protect the congregations first. So you could say do nothing. We'll ride this out. We have, if we unrestricted everything that's currently restricted and pulled it all together, we have about $200,000 wrapped up in savings. So this isn't sustainable for a long time, but you could say we're going to ride it out. We're going to ride it out in faith, and we're going to ride it out together. And then there's the 4th option, which is you could take a completely opposite direction and say, if we see that this is inevitable, maybe the thing we should do is go out with a bang in supporting the things that we believe in. If you follow Bishop Emeritus Duncan on Twitter, you see he retweeted something this morning from the Delaware Synod that said, the worst thing to happen to a congregation is not that it could die, but that it would live and do nothing. And that might be applied to Synod too. But those are the questions that this assembly has to answer. And if you choose no action, that's completely valid. But know that you've made a choice there too. That this isn't going away. Bleeding $30,000 is not something small when your whole budget is $300,000. So, if you're wondering then what you can do, whatever you do, it would be due when the budget comes as an official proposal after I'm done giving this speech. So the motion comes from City Council, it needs no second. We'll move straight to floor debate, and at that time you have the opportunity to amend things as you see fit. And you can choose to cut a few things. I mean, there's almost no one thing you could cut that would be enough to fill the gap, so it would have to be multiple things. But you could choose to amend and cut things. You could choose to amend the income worksheet. You could choose to do nothing. And those, at this point, those are all valid options. And I think it's really important that we leave this Synod Assembly confident in whatever choice we choose. Because being Synod means we walk together. And sometimes we walk together in joy, and sometimes we walk together in sorrow. And if we're going to walk together into the great white light, then we're going to walk together. So I'm not going to speak to that too much longer. I will take a few minutes to answer questions to the best of my ability. Is that okay that I do that? Okay.
Any questions for Treasurer Solberg? Mr. Brooks?
Rather than thinking that anything is inevitable, and rather than forgetting that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing, why don't we all pray and ask God for wisdom and His favor as to what to do about all of this?
Patrice Wire, pastor at St. Paul's, New Haven. Mine's not really a question for you. I just want to commend the Treasurer and Finance Committee and the Synod Council for at least attempting to balance a budget and present a reasonable income base and expense base. I come from a Synod just last year that their budget, they had only cut 5% from what they gave to churchwide. Their budget proposed a $200,000 excess coming out of an endowment principle, which at the rate they were going, that Synod will probably not be in existence in 13 years. So I commend you all for at least trying to figure out a way to balance the budget. As far as, proposing something different, I would just encourage all of us here to go back to our congregations and talk about not only what we have to do at home, but how we need to support the Synod with the basics at least, and maybe have a special offering at least once to increase the income a little bit. But thank you for trying to give us something that's reasonable to vote on and that's faithful. Thank you. Thank you.
Pastor Lindeman, are you coming to a microphone?
Yes. Pastor Casey and Lindeman, pastor at the Church of the Covenant. Joe, I just want to thank you for all that you do. I speak to say, we can't just continually allow us to, from my standpoint is, we can't just continually bleed out, that we have to do something. And I realize no options or any option that we take are hard choices. I guess I just call into question maybe one area, and I'm a Philadelphia grad, and I guess just hearing this $30 million gift that the seminary has had is fantastic, and I see one of the things we give is $26,000 to the United Lutheran Seminary. So I don't know if I call for a question of whether that is wise to continue to do, but I see that maybe as one area that we could consider either pulling back or maybe analyzing next year.
Thank you. Well, I'll address it real quick, and if you want to speak in too. So if that were something you'd want to do, that is something that could be brought as an amendment to the budget. And I will speak to say that that is why Finance Committee didn't approach these kind of cuts, because former Synod assemblies have uplifted, especially education, as being very important, which is why that sort of cut would have been inappropriate from us. So if you continue to wonder, why do you tell us that we have this problem but you don't present a solution? That is why, because that solution is going to have to come from the Assembly. It really would be unfair to the Assembly if it was forced upon you by Finance Committee. I'm going to let Bishop Riegel speak to that as well.
Just a point of clarification about the budget construction of the seminary and the place of this particular $30 million gift. The gift is designated for scholarship support. Okay? And the old rule was to educate a seminarian, only 1/4 of the cost of educating a seminarian was the seminarian's tuition. Now, that number has shifted some. I don't know where we are now, but it's still less than half of the cost to educate a seminarian is tuition. So that gift goes entirely to fund the tuition portion of it. It doesn't resolve the lion's share of the cost of education. That's supported by judicatories and endowments and funds that are not restricted for scholarship usage. Okay. Does that answer your question, Pastor Whitman?
It does, yes. Thank you, Bishop.
Okay. Also, the particular number, why 26,000, that number is based on the last time the Synod received what is known as the basic synodical support apportionment. The way the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America used to do it, they no longer do it this way, is every year each synod in the church would receive a notification from the church-wide expression indicating what your expected fair share of theological education support was. And it was based upon an interesting and complicated but equitable formula that looked at the aggregate operational expenses of the congregations in a synod versus the aggregate operational expenses of all congregations in the ELCA, and then apportioned that out throughout the churches. So it's sort of based upon what the reality of your local situation is. This synod has consistently, with one exception, met or exceeded that basic synodical support number. There was one year we were less than it, and then when extra income came in, we restored it. We are one of the few synods in the church, there are others, but we're one of the few that has always met that basic synodical support formula by the end of the year. But it is no longer in play. So many synods complained about it, that it is no longer employed in the church as a directive, and now we are sort of left to just a consultation process with the seminaries.
Are there any other questions or comments for me? Reverend Chair, will you be the one to bring the budget?
On behalf of City Council,
okay. And which one are we doing first? The expense or the income?
all this together.
Okay. Then we have
Point of
before
order.
you.
Bishop?
I'm sorry.
Is there a question from the floor? Or are you guys waiting for debate?
I called point of order because there were people at the line while you talked about.
Excuse me. I assumed that Pastor Ridenour and Pastor Holbert were coming to debate the budget when it was moved, but I could be wrong. Do you have questions, sir?
More of a statement than a question.
You tell me if it's more appropriate now or once debate begins.
Well, I'm not going to move anything.
Go ahead.
When the debate begins.
Okay. Mr. Holbert, a point of clarification that you're seeking?
Joel, is there anything that you wouldn't do
Oh,
of those four choices? I wouldn't ask what you would, but seeing as you are the most familiar with these numbers. Matt Holbert, Grace, Fairmont, yeah.
Of everything that's anywhere an option. So the Synod to me has two really important things that we offer. The full-time ministry of the bishop and what we do for seminarians. In fact, the Synod, in my opinion, exists to put pastors in congregations and to raise up leaders out of congregations and send them to seminaries so that they can be pastors who become congregations. So to me, those are the most basic core functions of the Synod. And without those things, would cease to be a point in the Synods existence entirely. But it was a well-worded question because it doesn't, if I answer just the question, it doesn't leave me a lot of wiggle room to say anything else, does it? So, is that okay? Thank you. All right, if there are no other questions and comments, then we'll go ahead and move the question. You have before you, I'm sorry.
At this point, the appropriate thing is to ask points of clarification. So just to be clear, if someone is coming to microphone, if your intention is to argue for or against the budget proposal, you should save that for debate. If you're asking for clarification, information now is appropriate.
I have to leave to go to worship tonight. But the point that I just figured, because I can't stay for the rest of the debate, I want to at least ask the question, whether I like it or not.
This is Pastor Rick Egbert, Shepherd of the Hills.
Pastor Rick Egbert.
And could you speak into the microphone, sir?
Sorry. The question that I have is, I know we just moved our synod offices. Being a congregation that does not have a physical location, do we need a physical location? And if we don't have a physical location, do we need a full-time administrator? Those are the questions, and I have to leave with you because I have to go lead worship.
Thank you, Mr. Egbert. Pastor Egbert. Okay. Treasurer Solberg, will you move the adoption of the budget on behalf of City Council? City Council has recommended adoption of the budget, therefore it does not need a second. It's before you as the main order of business on the question to adopt the budget as presented. Any debate? Pastor Reitner.
Bill Reignauer, First English Wheeling. I'm not speaking for or against, but would just make an observation. I've been around 20-some years. The way the budget looks, the numbers have changed over the years, but the budget looks the same as it did in 1997. I'm supposed to talk to you, sorry. It looks the same as it did in 1997. It's got the same yellow bands in the same places. It does. It looks the same. You could take 2018 off of this budget and write in 1997 and you would be good to go. It looks the same. So the question or the point I'm trying to make is, what would it look like if we put a blank sheet of paper on the table and built a budget starting with a blank sheet of paper? What would that look like opposed to what we have now? That's simply begging the question.
Anyone else coming to debate? Mr. Brill? Anyone coming to debate? Okay, I feel duty bound to inform the Assembly you do have options here, procedurally speaking. The main motion is before you. If you are of the opinion that this is such a monumental thing that requires, I don't know why you would be of that because no one's coming to debate, but if you're of the opinion that you just can't decide today, it is always within the rights of the Assembly to pick a time to which to adjourn and have another meeting within the same calendar year. It's always within the rights of the Assembly, and I'm not suggesting that we do a 2-day thing. It could be a 1 afternoon thing, the type of thing with no hotel accommodations, no meals provided, but with a narrow focus of dealing with just one item of business. Okay? That is one of your options, and I sometimes think you forget that it is one of your options. I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm going to remind you you have that ability.
Point of information.
Yes.
If we did something like that, how many people from this assembly would have to show up in order to have quorum, like to make it work?
It is exactly the same people. There are the you are the Synod Assembly for an entire year until the next Synod Assembly.
Right, but we're not going to get everybody back, is what I'm saying.
It would have to be half of the membership of the Synod Assembly. Okay? So that is always a question whether you would even get quorum. All right, I'm not seeing anyone rising to make that motion.
We should make that motion.
I think that's
Matt Holbert, Grace Fairmont. I'll make that motion.
The motion to pick a time to wish to adjourn?
Yes, I think this needs more thought and prayer.
Do you want to instruct the Synod Council to make the arrangements on that time and place, or do you want to pick the time and place?
I would like the council to do that, because I delegate whenever humanly possible.
Would you like the debate narrowly focused upon the budget, but that would necessarily that would necessarily entail talking about what these mission priorities are?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the motion is to instruct the Synod Council to set a time for another meeting of the Synod Assembly at some point in the near future. Would have to be that for the matter of discussion and debate upon the budget, which means we would be referring this. Then the proper motion would be to refer this to that meeting. The motion is on the floor. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
It has been seconded. It is open for debate. Pastor Ridenour, I see you had the mic first. Pastor Olson, second.
Bill Ridenour, First English Wheeling. I would want to add to the amendment, to the motion I should say, to include a directive to Senate Council or the Treasurer or the Bishop or all three combined to produce in advance of that next meeting a white paper, for lack of a better term, so that we have in writing the main issues that would be before us that day, so we're not starting from scratch.
Okay. I will assume that you're moving then to add a second resolve to that,
Yeah.
to instruct Synod Council to prepare a white paper in advance for distribution to the Synod.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a second on that?
What's a white paper?
It's basically a discussion paper of options and things like that. I heard a second on that, so the motion on the floor is to amend the Holbert motion to instruct council to appoint a time to adjourn to. Do I have any debate on the amendment? Seeing no debate, if you're ready for the question, all in favor of amending, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. We are now back to a main motion, which now has two resolves. The first, to instruct Synod Council to pick a time to which to adjourn an assembly for discussion of the budget. The second resolve, that the Synod Council shall prepare a white paper for the Synod's consideration in advance. Pastor Olson, you are next in line.
Christine Olson, Trinity Martinsburg. I rise in support of this idea. You had commented, Reverend Chair, a moment ago that nobody was rising, and I was just sitting there. I don't know what to say. So I need more time to process. And, your words, Joe, thank you. But I need more time to process that and to think and to pray. And so I rise in support of getting together again to maybe actually be able to talk about it.
Thank you. Pastor Felici.
Jason Felici, Mount Lutheran Parish, Pendleton, Pocahontas counties. I rise against the motion for almost the same reasons as Pastor Olson. We need more time. We've been told that this is a pressing issue. At the same time, in the letter we were talking about years, not months. It's a significant amount of time and expense to gather this group together. There's no guarantee we would get a quorum. There's no when we're in a budget crisis, I'm not sure that even if we have to spend an additional $1,000 or $500 on an additional meeting, I'm not sure that it makes sense given the fact that there wasn't an appetite for debate now at a regular assembly. So what makes me think that having a special Senate assembly or another meeting at another time would produce more debate? I'm not sure it's economical or makes sense for the assembly to meet in special session. I think it would be better suited if we took a look at the budget and the finances earlier in the assembly agenda at the 2019 assembly, and that may make more sense.
Okay. Pastor Felici, one of the things you could have done is you could have moved substitution of the entire amendment to affect that, but it's too late now. You've spoken. So you can come back after Mr. Dalton.
Bruce Dalton, St. John's Davis, and member of Synod Council. I would like to propose an amendment.
Yes, sir.
That in absence of a full quorum at the proposed meeting, the current budget be accepted.
I'm sorry, that would be out of order, Mr. Dalton.
Okay.
Pastor Felici.
The thing that you said the other Pastor Felici could have done, I would like to substitute that.
Okay, so what I was saying the other Pastor Felici could do was to move substitution to the entire main motion to instead, and by moving substitution, it simply means we wouldn't be moving this, but to adjust next year's, to instruct the construction of next year's agenda such that consideration of the budget is earlier in the agenda to allow time for consideration.
I'm going to ask you to say that slower and look at Norma and see if, do you need that said slower? Okay.
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 Yeah, I can walk you through this. It's really cheap. Motion to substitute in the entirety. Motion to substitute in the entirety with to instruct the Synod Council, actually it's to instruct the bishop prepares the agenda, to instruct the bishop in the preparation of the agenda to place consideration of the Synod budget early in the agenda for the Assembly to allow time for ample consideration, or allow ample time for consideration. I have a motion from Pastor Felici Jess for that. Do I have a second on that? I hear multiple seconds. The item before us is the motion to substitute in the entirety. Pastor Schaefer. Oh, wait a second. Pastor Felici Jess gets first crack at speaking. Or do you recuse? She recuses Pastor Schaefer.
I feel, well, Pastor Paul Schaefer, St. Mark Lutheran, I just want to strengthen that perhaps a little bit to, I don't know how to word it, but to make this perhaps the priority of next year's assembly.
Yes.
And ask for a white paper too. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
What I see you're doing is you're trying to make a motion to amend. And this is and that's all right. That's good. Go back to the microphone. Okay. So this would be a motion to amend the substitution motion. Okay. This is going to get fun, folks. And in this case, what it is a motion to, by addition to the substitute. The motion is to amend. This is an amendment of the second degree. The amendment of the first degree is the motion to substitute in the entirety. The amendment of the second degree is to instruct Synod Council to prepare a white paper in advance of the Assembly and to make this a principal theme of next year's Assembly.
I need a scribe.
You scribe, you scribe.
So you have heard the proposed amendment to the second degree. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
It has been seconded. The amendment to the second degree, to the amendment to amend by substitution is now the matter before you. So the question you are asked is, do you want to add to the idea of substituting that a white paper be prepared and that this become a principal theme of the next Assembly? Any debate? I see no one coming to a microphone. If ready for the question, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. It carries. The pending question is the motion to substitute with to instruct the bishop motion to substitute in the entirety to instruct the bishop in the preparation of the agenda to place consideration of the budget early in the agenda to allow people for discussion, and that the Synod Council prepare a white paper in advance and make this the principal theme of the Assembly. That is the pending question. Anyone wishing to debate the motion to substitute. And remember, what this is replacing would be the motion to instruct the Synod Council to call a special meeting of the Synod Assembly with this as the order of business and a white paper attached. On the motion to substitute.
Wait, so this is to overtake that other?
Yes, it is to overtake it.
This would be next year instead of in a couple months.
Right.
Christine Olson, Trinity Martinsburg. I'm confused, but I think I'm for the substitution, except for I wanted to say that the first Pastor Felici said something like there wasn't an appetite for debate, and what I was trying to express before is that I think there is, at least in me. I just don't know what to say at this point, so I wanted more time to chew on it, but I think this also provides that opportunity, if I understand it correctly. So, thank you.
Anyone else wishing to debate on the motion to substitute? This is an amendment of the first degree.
Bishop?
Yes.
Can you clarify what we're voting on right now?
Yes, exactly. I was about to do that, okay? So, to put this all in perspective, the main motion, which is not what we're debating right now, the main motion is, and I'm going to say it in essence to instruct the Synod Council to call a special meeting of the Synod Assembly, preparing a white paper in advance, with the only business being the budget, preparing a white paper in advance of it, and that's it. So that's the main motion. The motion that's pending is to whether or not to keep that or get rid of it and place in its place that we would hold a Synod Assembly, the regular Synod Assembly, with the principal theme being the budget, with a white paper in advance, and with instructions to the bishop, I'm getting it in reverse order, I know, with instructions to the bishop to prepare the agenda with the budget consideration being early in the agenda. Okay? So that's what you want. Either you want a special Synod Assembly with the white paper and sole business, or you want to wait until next year's Synod Assembly, but with the budget debate for early on the assembly, and that being the principal theme, but also with the white paper. Either way, you get a white paper. Okay? Does that answer it? So the debate is on whether or not to substitute. Paul.
Point of order, and that is to make sure we understand if we're voting which way. If we say yes or no, what are we voting for?
Yes, okay. So if you vote yes, you are voting to say get rid of that original proposal for a special Synod Assembly, and instead, then let's debate whether or not we want to change the agenda for the future assembly, because you can still vote no on that at the end. Okay, you follow that? And if you vote no on this, you're saying, no, I want to vote on whether or not to have a special Synod Assembly. That's the principal thing I want to talk about. Do you catch that? It's basically a question of which do you think is a better thing to fight about? All right? Yes, Mr. Dalton.
I guess one point of order. When are we going to get to voting on the current budget?
Not until after this is done. Unless you have the right, Mr. Dalton, to postpone debate on this question, in which we go straight to the budget at this point. Okay. Mr. Wangren, Mr. Solberg.
I'd just like to speak for just a second to say the idea that we postpone this discussion until the next Synod Assembly, I am satisfied with that. And we definitely have at least a year. The situation is dire, but it's not that dire. That we can't pray on this for 12 months. So if I'd like to ask you to move in a direction I think we're moving the right way, and that's to say we'll make this the main topic of next year's Synod Assembly. We'll pass this budget as it stands. We will do lots of prayer, and we will do lots of preparation for next year. If that's the answer this assembly comes to, I'm satisfied with that.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wangren.
Paul Wangren, Trinity Martinsburg. I am saying the same thing that Joe said, but I want to raise this point. This is a huge philosophical question for us to consider, far more, I think, than we realize. We've been dealing with this from the finance side for a number of years. And I think that to have it as a part of our Synod Assembly gives more people an opportunity to be engaged in that. If we would have it in the middle, we're not going to have anywhere near the number of people that need to address the significant questions that need to be addressed. So I'm in favor of voting yes to whatever
substitute. Anyone else wishing to speak to this amendment of the first degree, which is the motion to substitute? I see no one else coming to the microphone. Then on the question to substitute, to replace the main motion, which is in essence to call a special synod assembly to have as the only matter of business the budget and to have a white paper prepared in advance, to substitute that with instructing the bishop to prepare the agenda for next year's assembly with consideration of the budget early in the assembly with ample time for consideration, to have a white paper prepared and make this the theme, the principal theme of the assembly. All in favor of substitution indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. No. All right. So we have it. The motion to substitute has taken place. The main motion, which is now the matter for consideration, is shall we instruct the bishop to prepare an agenda for next year's assembly with consideration of the budget early in the agenda with ample time for consideration, with the preparation of a white paper and with making the budget the principal theme of the assembly. Speaking on that, Pastor Jess.
I think this is an excellent idea. I do not like the idea of calling this our theme, though it is an important and dynamic conversation that must take place. There is nothing that says, we are a sinking ship, better than, we're only going to talk about the budget. It's our theme. So I think that we need to be cautious as we think about how we phrase that.
Thank you. Let me interject here. Theme was the word I used as I grappled to come up with something quickly to frame what you were asking. I have no problem if the assembly is willing by general consent to amend the word theme to something better. Shall we make it the principal focus? Is that acceptable? Let me put it then. Anyone who objects to replacing the word theme with principal focus? Any objections? Oh, no, I told people, never say anything if I ask that question. Was that you, Patrice? I will ask it again. General consent. Is there any objection to replacing the word theme with focus? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Pastor Olson.
Christine Olson, Trinity Martinsburg. I'm sorry. The wording of the thing says there will be a white paper prepared with time or something. Would it be appropriate to set an amount of time, like a month before, or, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause in time for one person might be 3 days, and in time for somebody else might be a month or a week.
You asked a question, it's certainly appropriate. Mr. Wanger, do you have a point from City Council's Vice President on that?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think clearly the Synod Council has to address it, and the Synod Council needs to make sure that when it gets out into the Synod in their congregations have enough time to address it as they need to. So clearly, we need to get this on immediately. Now, we'll be talking about it in our August meeting. We're going to bring it up then, and we're going to kind of put a timeline into it. So it needs to get out.
You have the word from the Vice President Synod that it's going to be in the agenda for the August meeting. And as a City Council member yourself, you can pressure and annoy.
And he's my parishioner.
That's right. Mrs. Tomish.
Vicki Tomich, aside, now let's go. This is a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What the Vice President, Mr. Wanger, was saying, does this mean that the congregations will get information enough to process what's going on right now financially within the Senate, so that we can take it to our councils and our membership? You understand what I'm saying?
The question was addressed directly to Mr. Wanger, and I will allow the question, Paul.
The answer is absolutely, because we need engagement and involvement of as many people in the Synod as possible. They need to be aware. And appreciating what Pastor Felici said over there, we need to look at this as a positive and opportunity. But we have struggles, but we need to also look at what we can do. So we want to engage everyone as much as possible. That'll be up to the congregation to have to take it in.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Pritt.
Pam Pritt, New Hope Lutheran Church, Minnehaha Springs. Call for the question.
Oh, we have previous question moved. Do I second on previous question? Second. Second on previous question.
What is the previous question?
It is previous question. It's oftentimes also called call the question. It's to end debate. It's a motion to end debate.
But what will we be then voting on?
We'll be voting on the main motion to instruct the bishop to prepare an agenda. Do you want me to say the whole thing? No, okay, so right now the motion is, right now the motion is previous question, and if adopted, would force us immediately to vote on whether or not you're going to instruct me to prepare an agenda well in advance, whether or not the Synod Council will prepare a white paper, and whether or not the principal focus of the Assembly will be this budget matter. Okay? So if you do not want to end the debate, if you want to continue debating that, you should vote no on the previous question. If you want to end debate, you should vote yes. Previous question has been called, has been duly seconded. All in favor of ending debate signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Debate is ended. We move to vote on the main motion to, and I'm sure there's entire wording over there. Oh, I have it. To instruct the bishop in the preparation of the agenda to prepare, to place consideration of the budget early in the agenda to allow ample time for discussion. To instruct the Synod Council to prepare a white paper for dissemination to the Synod in advance, and to make the principal theme of the principal focus of the Assembly the budget. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The motion carries.
Yes, I know.
Now, we come back. Mr. Solberg, I'm going to ask you if you will now move on behalf of Synod Council adoption of the budget as presented.
Coming from Synod Council, this needs no second. So we move the adoption of the proposed budget as presented in the pre-assembly bulletin of reports found beginning on page 63.
Thank you, Mr. Solberg. It is open for debate. It is also open for amendment. Is there any debate? Seeing no one come to the microphone, the chair assumes you are ready for the question. The question before you, shall the Synod adopt the budget as presented in writing in the pre-assembly bulletin reports? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The motion carries. The next item is the adoption of the support formula, which is also just authorized in the council.
So we have before us a motion to approve, to instruct Synod Council to develop a new mission support formula for calendar year 2019 and to communicate that to the congregations. So that mission support formula, it encompasses a few things, if I'm not mistaken. I told you before that the ELCA asks of us that they be included in our budget at 55%. Historically, synods have done the same thing and said to congregations, this is where we'd like to be in your budget. We haven't done that for years here. And it's time that we do that again with an updated number. I think the last number we had was
15%.
15%. And we suspended that for several years. And I would anticipate that it would be much lower than that now as far as we've got the budget. But that's the motion before you, which is to instruct Synod Council.
Motion is to instruct Synod Council to develop a mission support formula for calendar year 2019. It's been moved, automatically second because it comes from Synod Council. Is there any debate? Seeing no one come to the microphone, the chair assumes you're ready for the question. The motion to instruct Synod Council to develop a mission support formula for 2019. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it and the motion carries. Okay. The Assembly may have a 5-minute recess to catch its breath. 5-minute recess. 4 years ago, I failed to give adequate attention to my report because of illness in my immediate family. I've since gone back and looked at the report, and it was a beefier report than I remembered it being. Last year, I failed to even prepare a written report in advance because my father had died. This year, I am once again late to the party because of an emergency hospitalization in the Synod office. I already dread next year. But late as it was, the full report that I would give is posted on the online item. There was an email sent out to remind people to download it, and you should have had it. It is lengthy. It is 10 pages long, single-spaced, typed. I have no desire to read it to you if you are able to read it yourself. That's the first part of my report. The second part of my report, equally long and equally dense, is a rather large collection of numerous proposed changes to the Constitution, bylaws, continuing resolutions of this Synod in order to bring us into both full compliance with the ELCA constitutions, but also several recommended provisions and some things to get rid of artifacts, things we no longer do business that way and haven't done that business way with it for a few years, to get rid of those artifacts and clean up the items so that we have a clean set of governing documents. I will openly admit this is a pedantic fetish that I have.
I don't want to hear about your fetishes.
Yeah. That might have been a boundaries violation all on its own. So, anyway, by virtue of having submitted it in writing, my report is already received. All the items in the report are items of the report. There's a committee to respond to the bishop's report. It is their prerogative as to whether or not they want to handle any of the items that would be proposed for action. So unless you have questions you would like to ask me, I will step down and turn the chair over to Mr. Wangren to chair the assembly while the committee on the bishop's report reports.
Are there any questions to the bishop on his report? Hearing none, then I will ask for the report from the committee on the bishop's report, chaired by Pastor Linda. We're all getting tired and microphones are going all over.
It's on. Linda Muley, St. Mark's, Clarksburg. The committee for the report on the bishop's report moves en masse the adoption of the proposed changes to the governing documents with confidence that if anyone is able to understand all of the necessary constitutional issues, it is our bishop.
It has been moved. It comes from committee. It does not need a second. I want to make sure that you understand what is taking place. They are putting all of these governance issues before you en bloc, which means you're voting on all of them at one time. They have determined not to pull any out. If someone wants to pull one out, it could be pulled out if you would like to do so. You might get killed, but it may be done. and I'm looking at Pastor Jess Felici.
I'm here to be killed.
That's all right. Go right ahead.
Number 13 resolved, B8.01. It uses language to talk about the vice president in the future tense as though it will always be a man.
I accept that as an editorial correction.
Yes!
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't need to.
Two other editorial corrections, typographicals. On number 3, it should have said in the parenthetical explaining it that it was a matter of business related to the Synod Assembly, that if there's not previous notice, it requires a first reading. Okay? And the other one was number 16, that the word 12 should have been put in instead of the word 6 for the total members of the committee.
I do all that.
Thank you. You accept that. Any other questions? Ready to put it to a vote. What you're voting now is that all of those governance issues we're approving by this vote if you vote yes. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? That is carried. I think I am done and I can turn it back over to you. I think you can take over.
If you have not read my report, it is available online. I would encourage you to take a look at it. It covers several items of business that I thought were relevant to the life of the Synod. I don't consider them dead items. So there are things that I think we need to think about as we go forward, and there might be things to think about also in relationship to the principal focus of our next assembly as well. We move on to the report of the Resolutions Committee. Pastor Kliner.
Reverend Chair, the Resolutions Committee, through its faithful work, proposes 2 resolutions for action before the Assembly. We would take, the order I would propose is a resolution regarding ELCA 124111. Sorry, it's actually resolution regarding concerning. That's a typo. I leave that up to editorial.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've just been informed that the chair of the Bishop's Response Report Committee was not done.
Oh.
So
I stand out of order then.
Oh, that's my fault.
No, we're going to call her back up now and get this done. Paul, if you want to take the chair again, that'd be great.
Sorry, I call on the chair of the Bishop's Report response.
I didn't realize you were moving on, or I would have hollered. No problem. So this is one of those things where we actually worked on this last night, but it's amazing how sometimes things become even more appropriate as time passes. So this is from our committee. Bishop Riegel, we as a Synod deeply appreciate your leadership of education, presence, and particularly your commitment to ensuring that Word and Sacrament happens within all of the West Virginia, Western Maryland congregations, especially those without called pastors at the present time. Your representation of the unique gifts and challenges of our Synod at the church-wide expression is appreciated, and your tenacity within our territory is inspirational. We also appreciate your diligence in cost-saving measures, your hard work in transferring the location of our Synod office, and your willingness, along with your family, to shoulder extra duties in recent weeks due to unforeseen circumstances with the office administrator. We note that you are almost halfway through your first term as our bishop. We commend your vision of having worship workshops for daily office to encourage prayer as a way to renewal. We commend your strong leadership and teaching skills at the Larkham event as you lead us into deeper ecumenical relationships. We also appreciate the compilation of resources needed for congregations in transition through the vacancy manual. We sense in your report some frustration or the need to encourage our congregations on the proper relationship between faith and works, and we would express our concern that as each individual expression of faith is unique, that we celebrate that we are each living words nurtured through the Spirit, and that through what may appear to be works, that congregations at their core are trying to cultivate relationships that build community so that people are more able to hear the gospel. For how are people to know the love of God except embodied in God's people? We also want you to know that although we may not know where we are heading as a Synod, especially financially, that we all share in a commitment to move forward together. In that vein, we would encourage you to encourage conferences to discuss honestly and frankly, creatively and with an ear to the Holy Spirit, how we might envision what will bring new life into our midst. We need, as a Synod, to move forward into the future with an eye towards our gifts and make decisions not based on fear, but on vision. We also recognize the many challenges affecting the people in our congregations and surrounding communities, with the opioid crisis being a place of intersection. Individuals and families need the hope of a reconciling community where forgiveness and opportunities to begin again are manifest. We support all efforts to make the Lutheran gift of grace known. The opioid crisis is not an out there crisis, but one which takes up residence in our pews each week. Our congregations need resources and creative ideas, which the new tools for communication and networking should make more accessible. We know you work very hard on our behalf, and while we should encourage you to practice more self-care, we have come to recognize that for you, this may mean miles on the motorcycle, visiting churches, putting to paper a historical treatise or academic presentation, or thumbing through a catalog of the latest ecclesiastical vestments. We are grateful for your presence with us, and we keep you in our prayers. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I will now turn the chair back to the bishop.
Thank you. Pastor Kliner, I'm sorry, you're back up.
You like right now, or
You can go sit back down.
Reverend Chair, through the diligent work of the Resolutions Committee, we bring two matters before the Assembly as action items from our discussions this Assembly. The first is a resolution concerning ELCA 124111. Are you ready for the reading of the resolution?
Please do.
Whereas, in the bylaws of the ELCA 124111, states that, unless otherwise determined by the Synod, the synodical vice president shall serve as an ex officio member of the churchwide assembly and be included in the number of the Synod's voting members. And whereas this provision removes the freedom from the Synod Assembly of the West Virginia-Western Maryland Synod to select its lay voting members to the churchwide assembly, therefore be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia-Western Maryland Synod voice its objection to the loss of its voice in the selection of a lay voting member to the churchwide assembly, and be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia-Western Maryland Synod refer this policy to the Synod Council for amendment so that the West Virginia-Western Maryland Synod would elect 2 lay voting members to the churchwide assembly, of whom the vice president may stand for election, but be subject to all the other conditions and considerations in the bylaws of the Synod. And be it finally resolved that should the West Virginia-Western Maryland Synod deem it advisable and feasible to send the vice president of the Synod to the churchwide assembly ex officio, that the vice president of the Synod attend as an observer or visitor status to the churchwide assembly unless elected by the Synod Assembly.
Thank you, Pastor Kliner. It comes from a committee. It does not require a second. To be clear on the effect of this resolution, it does not actually change any rules at this time, but instructs the Synod Council to take this under advisement and prepare the necessary items for consideration at the next assembly. Is that correct?
Yes, although I want to stress the fact that we were voicing our displeasure.
You are also voicing your displeasure.
With the status quo.
Loud and heard, and this compels the Synod Council to prepare the bylaw change. They don't have a choice about that. Right, but you get to vote on it next year, up or down. Okay. Paul. Actually, Pastor Kliner gets first shot at that.
And I yield my time to Pastor Patrice Weidrich, who germinated this resolution.
Then it'd be Pastor Weidrich.
Germinated, I like that. Patrice Weidrich, St. Paul's, New Haven. In thinking about the comments that were made about the vice presidents going to churchwide assembly, you know, in a 3-year period, every 3 years, it's possible that for 2 churchwide assemblies straight on, either whether the vice president is a male or a female, it could be that 2 different times the lay person of that same sex would not be available to go, you know, a lay person go, and I think that's just not right. And I think, you know, Resolution Committee talked about it and felt that there was another way that we could handle making sure that our laity is present at churchwide along with our vice president.
Thank you, Pastor Weidrich. Pastor Wangren. Mr. Wangren. Sorry.
That would change everything.
I'm ordaining everybody. I mean, what the heck? Come on up, folks. It's
I'd
free
like
hands.
to make an alternative motion, and then I would speak to the motion. And the motion is that this be referred to Synod Council to address that.
That's what it is.
No, it's not. What I understand is that it's giving specific
It is giving specific instructions, but that doesn't prevent Synod Council from adding additional information to it.
Or changing, but no.
They can't.
Here's my, the reason, should I say
Okay,
why I
go
want to
ahead.
make the motion? I want to make the motion because there's a lot of history to this, a lot more back and forth. And to be honest, I'm not uncomfortable with this at all. I don't have any problem with it, but I think you need to know more from what's going on in churchwide, what's going on overall with vice presidents, than to just say yes to this at this point. And I think we're almost saying yes, even though it's giving it to Synod Council.
Okay, so your proposed amendment is?
I asked our parliamentarian, he said it's a motion.
A motion
The
to?
motion is that it's that the Synod Council take up this question.
Right, so you want to refer the resolution
To the Synod Council, that's what I want to do.
as it stands?
Yes.
Oh, okay, now I understand, thank you. So the motion is to refer?
To refer, but not instructing the Synod Council what they have to do.
Once it gets to Synod Council, they can do anything they want if it's just a referral.
That's my motion.
Yeah, that's right.
Second.
And I have a second on that. Mr. Wangerin, you can speak to it.
And the big key is I think there's far more background information, and I don't think we have the time for me to try to explain all sorts of things behind it. And I'd be very happy to do it next year. We have time. We're not talking about 2019, we're talking about 2022, and it's very legitimate. But I think that we need to have time to understand more on the whole thing so we can do it next year.
Thank you, Mr. Wangerin. The motion is a motion to refer. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the motion to refer? I'm going to explain once again what the difference is here. The resolution that has come before us is actually a resolution to instruct, okay? And it instructs the Synod Council to take the time before the next assembly to prepare a specific thing, but allowing it to work out the details of that specific thing. And then bring that thing back to us as an assembly next year for our consideration, where we could say yes or no to whatever the thing is. So to instruct the Synod Council to develop this doesn't actually commit us in the end to approving it. It just makes them do something that we can at least consider it. The motion to refer is to take this resolution and send the entire resolution unapproved, but also not voted down, to the Synod Council, where it would, in essence, become the replacement for you. At that point, once it hits the Synod Council as a referred motion, they would treat it exactly the way you would treat it, which means they would have the option of adopting it, which compels themselves in the next year to do exactly what the resolution says, or amending it in some way, or rejecting it in some way.
I want to add to that because I do not want to leave this on Synod Council. I think it needs to be brought back to you. So if it means, if you can just, trust them. Well, no, you said that the Synod Council can make the decision and just tell you what a decision is.
What the Synod Council's options are is to say, one, we think the resolution is fine, we're going to execute it. They can amend it in some way, or they can reject it completely, and then you will not see this the next assembly.
And I'm not happy with that. I think it needs to be brought back. So if it means, if you want to trust me from that standpoint, or if we want to put it in the motion, I'm happy to indicate that in my motion that the Synod Council is referred to the Synod Council, that it then come back to our 2019.
If you make that the motion to return to the assembly, what will return to the assembly is this resolution, and we start from scratch on the timing.
Oh, you're confusing me.
Yeah, no, it's a matter of, if you refer to return, what you're referring then to is that for the Synod Council to look at this resolution as it exists, and when they bring it back, they give comment on the resolution. But this would still be the resolution next year, which would involve in referring it to Synod Council again.
Well, question then, how do we word it so that his intent is trying to get?
Actually, Ben, what you're saying is the way that motion's, the way the original motion stands, it's going to go that way?
Say that.
That the Synod Council will be bringing it back. I want time to explain, but we're taking too much time right now, even doing this.
Yeah. I think it's fair. I'm just going to make commentary here, and you can ignore it, and I don't want to sway the assembly. You're on Synod Council. Christine's on Synod. How many people here are on Synod Council? Let's see the show of hands. Okay. You have all heard the gist of this debate. Okay. If this gets referred to Synod Council, it would behoove you to pay attention to the gist of that debate. While you are still free to do other things, if you don't do those other things, you face the wrath of the assembly. Okay? That's always a possibility. Okay. So the motion is to refer. And notice I said not refer with instructions or anything else. To refer simply gives it to the Synod Council and they take over from that point. Okay? All in Patrice? All in favor of the motion to refer indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. No. The ayes have it. So the motion is referred. Okay. Now understand, Synod Council will deal with it after that point. Okay, Pastor Kliner.
The second resolution we bring before you is a resolution commending Chaplain Anthony Setley. Whereas the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod desires a presence and voice in higher education and among those who serve our country. And whereas the Reverend Anthony Setley has been called to serve our Synod in both contexts as chaplain to the campus community of West Virginia University and the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. And whereas Chaplain Setley reminded the 2018 Synod Assembly that if we ain't there, we ain't there. Therefore be it resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod welcomes Chaplain Setley among us and commends his ministry to both the campus community of WVU and the soldiers entrusted to his care. And be it finally resolved that the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod reaffirms its commitment to institutional chaplaincy and the proclamation of the gospel in all its purity and the right administration of the sacraments to those who live and work in institutional settings.
Thank you, Pastor Kliner. It comes from the Resolutions Committee. It does not require a second. You have heard it. If there is no objection, we will consider the resolution stated. Pastor Kliner, would you like to speak to it?
In the words of my colleague, it speaks for itself.
Any other debate on this resolution? Seeing no one coming to the microphone, I presume that you are ready for the question. Is there any objection to dispensing with the reading of the resolution? Seeing none, the resolution is considered stated. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The motion carries. Pastor Kliner, I believe you have one last resolution.
I do.
There is no unfinished business at this time. All that remains is the report of the Resolution Committee, the report of registration, the motion from the Minutes Committee, and then some closing announcements and exercises. And what am I seeing back there? Oh my God, we haven't reported on that? Wow. So we're going to talk to you after Pastor Kliner here with the closing resolution.
I'm going to sit for this one because it's on my computer. Whereas, a concluding resolution from the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod. Whereas, the people of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod Assembly, having been called, gathered, enlightened, and made holy from across the territory of the Synod by the call and the will of the Holy Spirit, having met in assembly and worship in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, and now being discharged and sent back to the congregations that have sent us. And whereas we have been met here by our Lord Jesus Christ in the faces and persons of our neighbors, and having been well taught and admonished so that we might live faithfully in the world. And whereas we now prepare to take leave of one another, the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod wishes to especially thank the pastors of the Potomac Conference, especially pastors Karen Erskine Valentine, Diane and Matthew Day, Christine Olson, and Ronald Kreinchek for their hospitality, labors, and leadership. The people of St. Peter Lutheran Church for their hospitality and worship, the people of St. James Lutheran Church for their hospitality in feeding us on Thursday night, and everyone who brought food and drinks for us. Our Bishop, Matthew Riegel, for his faithful leadership, preaching, and teaching. For our teaching theologian, Pastor Eric Wester, for enlightening us and challenging us to exemplify koinonia through the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, to minister on the margins, and bringing us greetings from the presiding bishop and the wider church. to the staff of the Clarion Hotel and Conference Center for their excellent hospitality in housing, feeding, and service to us. To the Reverend Matthew Holbert, the Reverend Matthew Day, Ms. Lindsay Buchelman, seminarian, and Mr. Jeremy Lamson, seminarian, who provided technical help for the projection of video and audio amplification so that we might clearly see and hear one another. To the Reverend Jessica Felici, the Reverend Diane Day, the Reverend Kevin Mackey, Mr. Tanner Carr, Mr. Stephen Gabbard, and Mrs. Caitlin Ruddle for their diligent work on elections.
Stop, Pastor Kliner. Before this is finished, we move in, add the Most Reverend Dr. Ralph Duncan as he joined that committee.
Very good. And the Most Reverend Ralph Duncan. Reverend Dr. Ralph Duncan. Very good. To all who have faithfully served on all the various committees of this assembly, carrying on the various tasks so that the business of the assembly might be possible. To our impromptu office administrators, Ms. Maureen Corrigan, Mrs. Tamara Riegel, and Ms. Grace Riegel, who collectively stepped into the breach and faithfully served in the background of the assembly, printing and collating, generally smoothing over, arranging and coordinating, so that the business of the assembly might run smoothly, and for everyone who prayed and worked for the good of this body. So be it resolved that in parting, the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod may say loudly and humbly, thank you for all of God's blessings. And be it further resolved that in parting, the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod may say loudly and humbly, God bless you and keep you until we meet again next year in Jerusalem. And next year, and may be finally resolved, that in parting, the 2018 Synod Assembly of the West Virginia Western Maryland Synod may say loudly and humbly, peace be with you. Amen.
It is moved by committee, does not require a second. If there is no objection, dispense with the reading and stating of the resolution again.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Is there any objection to the chair not reading it? Hearing no objection, the question is stated. Any debate? Hearing no debate, all in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed say no. The motion carries. Pastor Jess Felici, report of Elections Committee. This is what, your 5th report?
I don't know.
You're happy, I see.
I'm so happy. For the election to Discipline Committee, laity. 1 position was available. There were 98 votes cast, of which 98 were legal, 50 being necessary for an election. Legal votes cast were as follows. Y'all. 51, Brandon Mitchell. 47, Kim Holbert.
Brandon Mitchell receiving the necessary majority for election is declared election appointed to the Discipline Committee as a lay member. And that concludes all of our elections. Report of the Registration Committee.
Reverend Chair, as of 4:30, June the 2nd, number of clergy voting members registered 38, the number of clergy signed in attendance 36, the number of lay voting members registered 86, the number of lay voting members signed in 86, total number of voting 122, number of visitors registered 19, number of visitors signed in attendance 19. Grand total registered 143, grand total attending 141.
Thank you very much. Some announcements. Books. The red military service prayer books for the armed services, those are yours to keep. If you do not want to keep yours, we are collecting them along with all surplus books to be distributed to military personnel, veterans, and the like. Pastor Ron Kryansek was one of the members of the local team, will be taking care of it. There is a box out in the lobby for that. So if you're not keeping your book, put it in there. I can't imagine anyone not keeping the book. But if you're not keeping a book, let it go to good use, or if you just want to give it away, these books can also be purchased online. Name tags. Please return your name tags to the cardboard boxes that are out in the lobby. We have enough of a budget crisis without having to buy new name tags. The Synod Assembly Survey is located on the online manual. If you go to the last section under Assembly Business on the agenda, you'll find the Synod Assembly actually has a hyperlink. It'll take you to the online item, or you can fill it out in the manual itself at the end of the... There's a torrential downpour taking place according to Sherry. Just to let you know. Hey, there's no reason to leave, right? The next Synod Assembly. You have things? Oh, you have a motion. Norma has something too. The next Synod Assembly will be in Wheeling, West Virginia, at the Highlands. But it, in all likelihood, will not be the first Friday and Saturday in June. This is one of those weird years where the proximity of that to Camp Luther is unacceptable. So we will actually be starting in the last Friday of May for that assembly, unless something goes horribly wrong. Okay, so that's in the Highlands, and you've already set some items for that. Norma, you have something that I missed and I shouldn't have. I apologize.
I refer the minutes of meeting 5 to Synod Council.
Motion is to refer the minutes of the last meeting for Synod Council for review and action. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Motion carries. The minutes are referred. I would like all those who were just elected in this Synod Assembly to please come forward. For Synod, all I need is the new people. For Synod Council, if you're re-elected too, for Synod Council, for Discipline Committee, for Consultation Committee, for Church-wide Assembly. Or marching band, I'd say dress that on. St. Paul says, just as each of our bodies has several parts and each part has a separate function, so all of us in union with Christ form one body, and as part of it we belong to each other. Our gifts differ according to the grace given us. If your gift is prophecy, then use it as your faith suggests. If administration, then use it for administration. If teaching, then use it for teaching. Let the preachers deliver sermons, the almsgivers give freely, the officials be diligent, and those who do works of mercy do them cheerfully. Will you assume the offices to which you have been elected? And will you endeavor to discharge your duties faithfully to the glory of Christ our Lord and in service of his holy church? If so, answer, I will, and I ask God to help me.
I will, and I ask God to help me.
And you, people of God, will you support and pray for these your servants in this work? If so, answer, we will.
We will.
The offices to which you have been elected are now committed to you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let us pray. Gracious Father, you call your people to service and give them varied tasks in the world and in your church. Grant these your servants grace and strength, that they may serve you faithfully to the glory of your name, through your Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. The God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the everlasting covenant, equip you with everything good that you may do his will, working in you that which was well-pleasing in his sight. Through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. And now, prayers for closing of the sentence. You will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. I chose you and appointed you to bear fruit which abides. Lo, I will be with you always to the end of time. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your holy name, and finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Lord God, our Father, you kept Abraham and Sarah in safety throughout the days of their pilgrimage. You led the children of Israel through the midst of the sea, and by a star you led the wise men to the infant Jesus. Protect and guide us now in this time as we set out to travel. Make our way safe and our homecomings joyful, and bring us at last to our heavenly home, where you dwell in glory with your Son and the Holy Spirit, God forever. I now declare this assembly closed in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.